Welcome to Mac Stories Unwind. Today's show is brought to you by Collide. I'm John Voorhees, and with me is Federico Vitici. Hey, Federico.
Hello, John. How are you?
I'm doing all right. You know, we've been talking a lot about weird American food, and I guess weird Italian food, too. I actually have one that I'm going to save.
Gelato is not weird, but
no,
sure.
Gelato's not weird. Neither is ice cream or soft serve or any of that stuff. You should go to a Dairy Queen sometime. I just saw something recently. Here we go again.
We're not talking. Oh my God. What did you see?
I think I saw that President Biden was in a Dairy Queen recently. I saw some headline about him going there.
I saw photos.
No. You know what it was? It was Donald Trump.
Oh
and
my God.
They did the thing I told you about where they turned the blizzard upside down. And he apparently exposed himself as someone who doesn't understand what a blizzard is. And I think he got kind of mocked for that because it's a pretty well-known thing in the United States that's been around since the 80s.
I saw photos of President Biden at the beach.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. I saw.
Was he ripped? Was he was he in a Speedo going in and out of the surf?
No,
or
it
what?
was just sort of reading a book under a beach umbrella or something.
That seems a little more in character, I suppose.
Yeah. Anyway, you wanted to have like a more sort of serious behind the scenes sort of topic, right?
Yeah, I suppose so. I thought maybe we could talk about our writing processes, and what do we do to get started writing? Because I think that that's like a mystery to a lot of people. It's like, how do you decide when it's time to start writing? And you and I just went through this whole process of writing OS previews, and in between all that, we've both been doing other posts on the site, and it's like, where does it all come from, and when do we decide? What do we decide to write? When do we decide to write it? How do we get started? All that stuff. And honestly, I feel like it's a little bit of a mystery myself. I don't really understand my process particularly well, other than I really just sit down and start writing most of the time. And I suppose that part of that is practice, like doing it every single day for more than 5 years. Like the other day, I wrote a story, well, as we record this today, about video game and app preservation. And I kind of had read a couple of articles and thought I wanted to do a link post, but then I just sat down and started writing. And before I knew it, it was a little bit more than a link post. It was more of an analysis of a couple of different things and explain how they fit together. And that, I don't know, that's just how I do it sometimes. I read a couple of things. I sit on them for a while. I think about them. They kind of process in the background. And then I just kind of know when it's time to sit down and start writing. And then I just sit down and I write, usually without an outline these days.
Yeah, I guess the tricky part is that it's always like this sort of evolving process, right? And I think one of the common mistakes that we sometimes make, but that I think a lot of people who maybe haven't been writing for like 5 years or 15 years, a common mistake is to sort of get stuck on the process more than what you just said, which is like actually just start writing, just do the thing, like sit down in front of a note-taking app and start writing. So I think we should that's the most important point in my mind, which is don't get sort of stuck on the details of your process, because it's very similar to sort of just playing around and constantly tinkering with the task manager or with your desk setup. You can get, and I'm going to give you an example. I wrote most of my iOS and iPadOS 17 public beta story in the Notes app with the touch keyboard of my iPad at night. Just because, I didn't want to disturb Sylvia while she was sleeping with the magic keyboard. So I used the touch keyboard, and that was also an excuse to try the new autocorrect. But also, I had most of my notes in the Notes app because it's one of the things I got to test for iOS and iPadOS 17. And so I said, you know what, I'm just going to start writing here, and later I'm going to bring it into Obsidian because that's where I want to finish writing the story and doing my editing and using all my plugins. But you can start writing anywhere. Like you can write a blog post in Apple Mail if you really want to. It's not the tool, it's what you want to say. So and that sounds obvious, but it's not, because I see so many people sort of get stuck upon like, so before I write something, what's the perfect text editor? And let me tell you, you shouldn't care about that. Like, if you have something to say, just say it, and you can use anything you want to write a blog post in Markdown.
Yeah, you really just need a keyboard and a text field. That's really all you need. And there have been times, plenty of times, when I've started writing something on my iPhone, just sitting like in a doctor's office or something and just pounding out a bunch of sentences of the core of an article. Then I go finish it later on in a more proper setting where I have, better audio, whatever it happens to be. I have the tools that I'm used to having with me, but you can do it really anywhere. That's a good point.
And I have a few more tips. Like, that being said, that you can write anywhere at any time, as long as you have an idea or something to say. There's a few things that I do that I think are beneficial to the process. One of them being, make sure that you have quick access somewhere on your phone, because, I mean, let's face it, it's the most immediate device that we have in our pockets all the time. And maybe you should also have a version of this for the Apple Watch. We talked about this before. Something that I do is have access to a place. Can be a note in Obsidian, can be a note in Apple Notes, a widget works, a shortcut works. Just have something that requires one tap on your home screen where you can open it and type out something that you will find later. And I'm going to give you some practical examples. Sometimes when I'm working on a big story, because my brain, I've decided to accept that it works this way, there's some kind of background process that is always ongoing, like in the back of my mind when I'm working on a big project. Like even, and I know that it's wrong, right? I know that I shouldn't do this, but sometimes from the back of your mind, an idea for something you want to add to a story sort of floats to the surface, right? And so sometimes I have, for example, a big draft in Obsidian, and it stays there. But let's say that I'm at the supermarket, or I'm parking my car or whatever, and an idea comes up, and it's like, and I'm like, that's a pretty cool sentence, or like, that's a pretty good point that I could add to the story. I don't open my draft because that's too much friction. I got to open the draft, make sure that I have the latest version,
make sure you don't edit something by mistake.
Exactly.
That you'll
find the spot where I want to use the sentence. No, I just open a note, like a scratch pad, type out the sentence. Like, literally, I would type, add this sentence to the section about iPad. And then I open double quotes and I write down the thing and I'm done. So later, when I'm actually writing again, I go through this list of ideas, and some of them are stupid. Some of them are actually still pretty good. But it's this separate sort of bucket where when an idea comes up, you can save it for later. And I can tell you, I used reminders for this. Some years ago, I used to email myself back when, 10 years ago. When
right, you and Steve Jobs.
Yeah, I used to send emails to myself with these things because it's a very effective system because you're going to find it in your inbox, right? I used to iMessage myself. Like, whatever works for you, it's fine, as long as you save those ideas for later. And finally, I would say, and this maybe comes with experience, but there are times when something sort of happens and I get the feeling that, this is something that, what's the expression? Got to strike the iron while it's hot. Sometimes there's something and I'm like, this deserves a blog post right away. An example being the shortcut that I wrote last week for Threads, when Threads came out. And
right.
And they didn't have support for universal links yet. Now they do. So I put together, in 30 minutes, a shortcut to open a Threads profile in the Threads app. And that's the kind of process where you got to make a decision right away. This is something that the rest of the world needs to see. And so you just put together a quick blog post and you publish it. And so I guess this is the process. Sometimes I would sum it up as big projects deserve important tools, but don't get stuck upon the details. And for shorter things and saving ideas, anything works, as long as you have a system for finding those things later.
Right. I think that with that, the worst thing you can do is have multiple systems for writing down those ideas because if you
Hmm.
scatter them across, reminders and iMessages to yourself and maybe like, I don't know, good links or
Yeah,
the
just
Notes
pick
app or
one.
whatever. Right. Because if you have it in a bunch of places, you won't always find what you're looking for. I would add a couple of things. First of all, write when you're rested. I think it's important to do that. I mean, I know that maybe you take a different approach to this sometimes because I know you do write late at night. But personally, I find that if I write first thing in the day, I'm always
Mm.
much more efficient, fast, and write better when I'm rested. That's not entirely true because I do have a number of evening sessions of writing too, like after dinner and stuff, when I'm usually kind of at a fairly low energy level. But by and large, I find being rested helps a lot. I do feel like outlines are important if you're doing something big, like
Hmm.
for our OS previews, I had a bunch of notes. They were basically the notes that I'd already started taking for the fall review. And I used that as kind of a checklist to make sure I was covering the things that I wanted to cover that I thought were important and not missing anything. But I don't like to let the outline get in the way of the writing itself, where I don't need an outline that is really neat and tidy or looks really good or is, I don't know, just a great form of an outline. What I need is an outline that's going to remind me of what I need to write. So that outline, I usually discard all that stuff eventually because those are just notes. Those are just things that go into being like reminders to write about certain things, and then I discard them. So yeah, I guess that I think your points are really good. I agree with you about you just write in whatever you've got and just start doing it because the only way to get better at writing is to write a lot. And the way to do that is just sit down and start doing it in whatever text field you have.
Yeah. The one final thing I will say, it's another tip that I thought about, something I do personally.
Hmm.
I have a note in the Notes app where I append links for things that I want to link to. Usually on Mac Stories, it's a note called link posts. This is something I started doing a couple months ago, maybe. And the note is pinned right to the folder that I have in Notes for Mac Story stuff. So when I find a link in Safari or Safari View Controller and I open the share sheet, I select the Notes extension, and when I open that folder, that note is immediately right there at the top of the
Hmm.
list because it's pinned. This note, I have a recurring reminder that repeats every couple of days and says, go through your list of link posts. So I don't forget to check out the links I thought were interesting and that I thought deserved like a mention on Mac Stories. Because otherwise, like I've been in the situation where you feel good about saving things for later and you forget to check those things for later. And so associating a reminder or a task, whatever you want to use, with the place where you save links for inspiration that can become blog posts, I think that's useful, especially if it's like a recurring thing that you check 2 or 3 times a week.
This episode of Mac Stories Unwind is brought to you by Collide. If you work in security or IT and your company has Okta, this message is for you. Have you noticed that for the past few years, the majority of data breaches and hacks you read about have something in common? It's employees. Hackers absolutely love exploiting vulnerable employee devices and credentials. But it doesn't have to be that way. Imagine a world where only secure devices can access your cloud apps. In this world, phished credentials are useless to hackers, and you can manage every OS, even Linux, from a single dashboard. Best of all, you can get employees to fix their own device security issues without creating more work for IT. The good news is you don't have to imagine this world. You can just start using Collide. Collide is a device trust solution for companies with Okta, and it ensures that if a device isn't trusted and secure, it can't log into your cloud apps. Visit collide.com/MacStoriesUnwind to watch a demo and see how it works. That's KOLIDE.com/MacStoriesUnwind. Our thanks to Collide for their support of the show. All right, Federico, why don't we move on to our picks today? What have you got for me?
All right, my pick is pretty simple. It's a song that I've been obsessed with. It's a new single by Olivia Rodrigo, "Vampire." So this is
It's
from,
so good.
yeah, it's a very good song, right? And so she's got a new album coming out, I believe, in September called Guts, and this is the much anticipated follow up to her 2021 debut album Sour. And so I don't know what I was expecting, I guess, from Olivia Rodrigo in terms of like, after the massive success of Sour, this sort of, she was everywhere, and she did a worldwide tour, and it's always difficult for these kind of new artists to come up, with the second album without sort of, with such high expectations, I guess, from the press, from the media, from people. But if this single is of any indication, I mean, I am so excited for this album, because this song is like, imagine imagine any of the hits from Sour, but sounding better and angrier and more mature. So she teamed up again with producer Dan Nigro, I believe. Worked with him on the first album on Sour, and Vampire sounds, to me, it kind of sounds like an Olivia Rodrigo song mixed in with almost like the Billy Joel song in a way. Yeah, I don't know why my brain made that association, but it kind of, especially the crescendo in the end.
Maybe it's the beat a little bit too.
It's the
I
beat.
think.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
that's what my brain latched onto. It's the beat and the piano, and sort of how the song progresses. But yeah, so this is basically it's not a breakup song. It's more like a song about an ex who sort of took advantage of her and her popularity and her fame. And this song lays it all out with Olivia realizing, I'm not sure if this is if she's the narrator in first person here, but I'm guessing all of her songs are kind of autobiographical. So, but yeah, it's her realizing, like, the song goes, you suck, basically saying like, you suck the blood out of me like a vampire, and sort of like this sense of maturity that comes with the progression of the song. And that's sort of the expectation that I have now for Guts, right? A more mature album, especially for this kind of artist who over the past couple of years has gone through such a massive rise to success. And so I'm really interested in hearing what she has to say in terms of like ideas and themes, like how do you handle fame at such a young age? How do you handle popularity? How do you handle sort of recognizing who's really a friend because they want to be around you regardless of your success and fame and money, and who instead, like the guy in Vampire, is just someone who wants to be around you because of your success, because of your popularity. So I love this song. I've been listening to it on repeat. It has to be, so far, along with Not Strong Enough by Boy Genius, one of my favorite songs of the year. So we'll see. Guts is coming out in September, so after the summer. And in the meantime, we have this one single. So yeah.
We do, and I expect we'll get a few more signals probably before it actually comes out. And if this is any indication of what the album's like, it's going to be a great album. So I'm really looking forward to that one too. My pick for this week is Hijack, which is a relatively new show on Apple TV Plus, starring Idris Elba as Sam Nelson. And kind of the gimmick of this TV show is that it plays out in real time during a flight from Dubai to London. So that's roughly
a long flight.
It is a long flight. It's a roughly 10-hour flight, I think.
Yeah.
And there are 10 1-hour episodes.
Oh,
and
nice.
So, yeah, exactly. So it is really designed to be taking place in real time, supposedly. So that's kind of the hook for what is otherwise kind of a, it's not a super original show, but it's a lot of fun, I'll tell you. This is the kind of show that maybe at one time before the streaming wars really took off, might have just been a 2-hour movie. telling the story of an airplane that is hijacked on a flight from Dubai to London and what happens from that. But having it stretched out, I think they've actually done a pretty good job of making this a full 10-hour show. Just kind of doling out clues along the way as to what's going on and what the motivations are as they go, with small reveals every week that really keeps you interested. So we're roughly a little over halfway through with this series. I've been watching it for a while now. I think I'm one episode behind, but it starts out with this guy, Sam Nelson, who's on this flight, and he's one of the last people on the flight. And all you know is they cut from action on the airplane, which is where most of the show takes place, to what's happening on the ground, primarily back in London with his family, as well as with the authorities who are involved in trying to figure out what's going on with this plane. And all you know about him, at least as far as I've gotten in the show, is that he is a negotiator, that he's called in to help close big international deals. But that's kind of all you know about the guy. And you kind of see that right away, because there's a group of gunmen who take over this plane early in the flight. And I'm not going to give away any spoilers here, really. But, I mean, that happens immediately, and it's kind of in the name. They hijack the plane.
Yeah, I mean, sure.
And the rest of the show is kind of figuring out, who are these people? You know, it's an odd assortment of people who have hijacked this plane. There's their leader is a British guy. There's a younger woman who's also British, I believe. There's a Muslim young guy. And then there's an older kind of middle-aged, I think maybe an American guy, maybe he's British too. But in any event, it's a weird eclectic mix of people from very different backgrounds, for the most part, who have taken over this plane. And Idris Elba is watching them very, very closely and trying to find ways to kind of gain the upper hand and avoid getting killed in this hostage situation. Okay. Meanwhile, on the ground, at the beginning of the show, nobody knows at all what's going on, because the flight has just kind of gone dark. They're not really communicating much with the ground, and they're on course to arrive in London in 10 hours. Now, slowly but surely, various clues show up, and there's concern with the authorities on the ground. And there's also things happen in the plane where they're trying to, the various passengers and groups of passengers are trying to both solve what's going on, but also, defeat these hijackers. Now, the things about this that are very unrealistic is things like people being able to sneak around a plane without the hijackers noticing them. I mentioned, I think there are 4 or 5 hijackers, and Idris Elba is able to, kind of sneak around this plane a little bit, get out of his seat, crawl around in the aisle, and not be noticed as being up and about, which is kind of ridiculous, obviously. But at the same time, as I said, I think it does a really nice job of doling out the clues very slowly. I still have no idea where this plot is going. Okay. And also being kind of exciting and a nice break from a lot of what Apple TV right now. TV Plus has a lot of sci-fi this summer, and there's some very, very good shows. Foundation's starting up again. Yep. Silo is also very good. But, that's a lot of sci-fi I'm going to have in my summer, and I like having this action show to watch that comes out, I think, on Mondays, which is kind of an odd day for TV Plus. But Jennifer and I have been enjoying it quite a bit.
Okay.
All right, Federico. That's it. It's time to get back, get inspired and doing some more of that writing that we talked about at the top of the show. I think that's what we got to go do some more link posts. You and I have been doing more link posts lately, which is a lot of fun. I enjoy doing that. Yeah. It is really nice. All right. You can find the two of us over at macstories.net. Federico and I are on Mastodon. Just go to vitici.macstories.net or johnvorhees.macstories.net to find us on Mastodon. We're also on Instagram and on Threads, where Federico is at Vitici. That's VITICCI. And I'm at John Voorhees. JOHNVOORHEES. Talk to you next week, Federico.
Ciao, John.